What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Second and Saints. John Hendricks alongside Ross Jackson coming at you on this Tuesday evening, this fine Tuesday evening. Ross, man, I hope you're doing well. Man, I'm excited, dude. We're 1 week away from Saints training camp this time next week, which of course we're live, but for those who listen on the audio format, we're going to be in California next week at this time next week. So super, super exciting. But how's things going for you, my man?
Great, man. Great. Glad to be here. Glad to be back at it. Love that we're doing a couple of shows this week. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. We're going to split this one up. Make sure we get you ready for training camp. So excited for it to all get underway, man. This is what we've been waiting for, homie. How are you?
I'm good, man. You're right, man. It's been a long time coming. I think when the Saints wrap up their season, and obviously this has been the kind of like norm for the past 3 seasons, no playoffs. You watch the postseason, you watch the Super Bowl, then everything kind of calms down. Then we get right in the Senior Bowl, and then it kind of dies down a little bit. Then we get into the Combine, and then we get into like all the draft stuff. So, free agency, then the draft and all that. So it's like every month kind of has something going for it, even without the Saints taking the field. But like once they get on the field again, and then they kind of tease us with like OTAs, mini camp and all that. And then we're like, all right, we want more, we want training camp. And it's going to be here before we know it. So next Tuesday, the veterans are going to report. Rookies reported today. And, next week will be about this time. I think we'll be getting close to talking to DA and getting some information. And a lot can happen between now and then, for sure, like veteran signing, what happens with Alvin Kamara. If we get any more news on any particular veterans, we expect some people to be either on PUP or NFI, which is going to segue into our first topic that we want to make sure that we tackle, which is fresh. According to NFL Transaction Report on Tuesday, Bub Means, rookie wide receiver, 5th-round pick out of Pitt, has been placed on the NFI, non-football injury list. Now, I did see something from his Instagram today. He is at the facility, so he clearly didn't make the trip to Cali. But Ross, your take, what does NFI kind of mean for those who probably don't understand what NFI versus PUP is? And, it sounds like this is maybe not something that's going to be lingering, should be, minor, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely. NFI is typically the list that you put a player on if they suffer an injury away from a team sanctioned event. So that could be a workout getting ready for training camp. That could be, I've heard of players, doing like, yard work and housework and like got hurt and things like that, like stubbed a toe in the middle of the night kind of stuff, can't run, like whatever it might be. It's something that might get in the way of conditioning and everything. And so it at this point in the off season, it's not as big a deal. Typically, where it becomes a big deal is if you start the season on the NFI list and you're required to miss a certain amount of games, and then you can begin your 3-week window to come back. Things like that. It doesn't sound like this conversation is going to get that far. I checked in with a couple different folks that are close to the situation and everything, and it seems like this is going to be something that is, I'm being told at least, that it's of little concern, or there's no major concern around it. And I think we even saw a report from Nick Underhill over at New Orleans Football that this would be, probably be getting back to a conditioning test to try to get back to practice sooner rather than later, rather quickly. So I think this is probably going to go pretty quick. Doesn't seem to be like any type of a big deal at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a thing, so we got to keep an eye on it, and
yeah, for sure.
It's different versus PUP because Benjamin brings up a good point about being paid. Like he still counts on the active roster, but the difference to NFI, the team cannot, like, they don't have to pay his base salary, right? I mean, that's kind of how that kind of works with the NFI and stuff, but I wouldn't worry too much, obviously, on that one. It's something he's going to be fine. Like I said, he's at the facility and doing rehab and stuff, and I'm sure it's just going to be a matter of time before he does the testing, gets cleared, and is out there. So again, it's a thing. It's it's something that I guess some of the freshest Saints news that's happened, you know what I mean, in a while. But again, I expect more of that to happen when the veterans report next week, right? You're going to get people either placed on NFI. Now, I think we talked about this last week, and of course, don't forget to go to those past shows and hit that like and subscribe button too. We're in growth mode over here, and we got a lot of good big things coming for you guys. But we talked about that last week about Tano passing off, probably starting on PUP, because he was doing football related activities. And so it depends if he was doing that at the facility or if he was doing it away from the facility. But, that'll be interesting if he goes NFI or PUP and such. And we'll keep tabs on Chase Young and other guys like that could Nephi sort of the one that's possible candidates and stuff. But, look, got a lot to talk about tonight. We always do. And it's the Willy Wonka, so much to do, so little time, I guess you could say. And we're going to break down the positions for the Saints in training camp, kind of give you our thoughts, our players that we want to watch, everything that we're kind of paying attention to, storylines. And we're going to start with the offense. We're going to break this down into 2 series. And so we're going to do the offense today. And on Thursday, we're going to talk about the defense. And of course, we'll probably rope in special teams because we can't ignore special teams, right? But
we could we could do kicker today and then punter with the defense.
There you go. Look, Ross Jackson coming in with the heat, the smartness. I can't forget about long snapper too, which is only Zach Wood, right?
That's right.
Lowest
rated. He doesn't even have competition. They don't even bring competition for him anymore. Remember, they used to do that. Right? They used to bring in like an extra long snapper. Now they're just like, what? It's Zach. He's good.
They had like a rookie guy. Was out of Kansas or Kansas. Yeah, was out of Kansas the other week. He was like a hometown kid. They got a tryout and stuff. But anyways, look. Talking about this offense, we know this is the biggest focal point of the Saints, right? I don't think, you look at everything, all the storylines, exception maybe 1 or 2, right? But all the storylines for the Saints, all of their success, all of the things really shifts to this offense, right? I don't think, you look at the defense, there are a couple stories, but with this offense, it centers around what's the Clint Kubiak offense going to look like? What is Kamara's future? What are the Saints going to get out of their tight end room? What's the future of Juwan Johnson? What's it going to be like? Are they going to add guys to the room? What's the offensive line look like? And so I think they've got a lot more questions to answer on the offensive side, obviously, versus the defensive side. But let's dive in. Let's talk about the quarterback position. I don't think it's really a mystery here, but, obviously we've got Derek Carr, who's going to be the starter. So I know some people have always thought, and they've made jokes or whatever the case may be, but he is the starting quarterback. He's going to be a week 1 starting quarterback, unless something crazy happens, which I don't see. And this offense is built to really help him out a lot of ways. And really what takes center stage is Jake Haener versus Spencer Rattler, but you can't forget about Nathan Peterman on the roster. But what's kind of your overall take on this quarterback room? And it's a little bit different as opposed to past several years in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the Saints really, I think that this shows you a little bit of a change of philosophy in terms of how they decide to build their their depth at quarterback. We've seen over and over again them typically go and try to find a veteran, sometimes even reclamation project type guys to come in and back up the starting quarterback. Throughout the Drew Brees days, we saw the veteran guys like, the Brunells, the Chase Daniels of the world, all that all came in and kind of backed up Drew as well. Luke McCown, can't forget him. Greatest Verizon commercial ever. I just think that like those, I think, was it Verizon or was it T-Mobile?
It was Verizon. No, it was Verizon.
Like the backup tower commercial. So good.
Yep.
But so I think that like you're seeing now a change of philosophy. This is an offense, or not an offense. This is a team and a coaching staff, or a previous regime was one that would typically get criticized for not being able to develop young quarterback talent, typically having to go to the veteran quarterback pool and effectively tried to even rebuild post Drew Brees through the veteran quarterback pool, guys like Teddy Bridgewater, guys like Jameis Winston. And then, of course, a weird season of Andy Dalton and all these other things. And then, they go to Derek Carr to find their new starter. But now you have this coaching staff of developers and Andrew Janocko and Rick Dennison there as the assistant, senior offensive assistant. You've got, Clint Kubiak, an offensive coordinator. And all of a sudden you have all these developers, and you have them at other positions as well, but at the quarterback spot. And now your depth is probably going to be 2 second year or rookie, second year or younger quarterbacks all of a sudden. And so 2 years, 2 quarterbacks drafted, 2 offensive coaching staffs, 2 quarterbacks drafted, and it just shows a big time change of philosophy. So I think a lot of the focus is going to be on Spencer Rattler versus Jake Haener. But my big thing is going to be, Derek Carr looked really comfortable operating that Clint Kubiak system in game situations during the OTAs. I'm really curious to see how much that comfort continues going into like a full-on training camp.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. And of course, what we were, I don't want to say the bag of goods that were sold, but basically the philosophy, the theory for this team is that, how they performed that final stretch of games was a final 6 is kind of what we're going to be seeing out of Carr and what we kind of should expect from the Saints offense. And of course, I think Clint Kubiak's going to elevate that exponentially, right? I think it's going to be even better. And again, it's designed so Derek Carr doesn't take as many hits. He doesn't have to do as much. And down the stretch, Derek Carr was one of the hotter quarterbacks down the stretch. And I mean, I know there was a game like the Rams game. They didn't play well. They had to come from behind and all that stuff. And so maybe it was a false bag of goods there, but still the stats are the stats. And I think for him, he's got more confidence in him. Clearly, year number 2 in New Orleans, and again, we saw that in OTAs. We saw that in minicamp. That it's definitely a comfort level for him. And I think it was even guys like Jay Haener and even Taysom Hill, because we obviously forget about him. But I mean, he's only attempted 30 passes in the past 2 seasons, so I don't know if I necessarily keep roping him into the quarterback room, but he is somebody that can be in the room at times. But they've all talked about how the verbiage is going to change here. It's going to be this little nuances, but it's not like it's totally fresh playbook. Like there's some things and concepts that the Saints already had that they can use to help learn this Kubiak offense, which is going to be, a new task for a lot of people. And for guys like Taysom Hill, when he talked about it, it made him happy. It made him excited. But Jake Haener, I know he's worked tirelessly in the offseason, ever since it kind of ended. And he's somebody that I think is got the leg up right now. And I think that he should win this backup job. But I expect some stiff competition from Spencer Rattler. But again, they're going to get rotated. They're going to have their fair shots. But I think what's more important is how Derek Carr does under this Clint Kubiak offense.
Yeah. I think for fun, and the truth for me is I think Spencer Rattler is going to be QB2 by the time it's all said and done.
Okay.
I'm going to go bright, shiny. And I'm putting a lot of that on the fact that he's this offensive coaching staff's draft pick. You know what I mean? So I'm putting a lot on that. I will say too that whoever is QB2 by the end of training camp, that's not indicative of what anybody's future actually looks like. Correct. Right? Like I think we would agree on that like having one of these guys be the backup quarterback to Derek Carr in 2024 doesn't mean that they're the guy post Carr. And so those could be 2 separate answers. And it could be a third answer too. It could be a Shedeur Sanders or something crazy like that in the draft. For all we know, we have no idea. So like there's all those possibilities that come up. So the real competition is really just about 2024. And ideally the 2024 competition ends up with no presence at all in terms of the success or failure of the 2024 New Orleans Saints. You want that to fall on Derek Carr and the New Orleans Saints starters as best as possible. Injury related conversation there. I think the other thing that I wanted to just quickly highlight too is you mentioned like the verbiage changing and everything. The other thing that's really important to that too is the play calling verbiage is simplifying. So there's another piece where you could see just things, maybe folks getting a greater grasp of this offense more quickly than what we saw through the first 12 games last year.
Yeah, and that's key because, I mean, everybody remembers the Sean Payton offense. He's rattling off a play, like a Drew play. Like, I mean, you lost me at like the 4th word or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a lot of words and it's built into it. Which, again, it's the NFL and a guy like Drew could do it. Not like a guy like Derek Carr can't, but simplistic leads to consistency, which should lead to results. Like, I think that's hopefully what we see out of it. And look, we've talked about this too, that I'm not so sure that Derek Carr isn't the quarterback for 2025 too. I think it depends on how this thing goes and with Dennis Allen this year. And of course, if it doesn't go well, then maybe it's a change, but I think Derek Carr is going to be the starting quarterback next year too. But if they can continue to grow and develop guys like Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, not a bad problem to have. Two young guys that could step in and potentially be there once your veteran quarterback is out of the mix. And of course, it's going to depend on where the Saints are at. Are they going to go to try to retool? Are they going to go strip it down and do a full rebuild? Or what is the thing that they're going to end up doing? And that remains to be seen. But again, Derek Carr's number one. I like your take on Rattler. Look, I think he's extremely talented. I think he's smart.
Oh, yeah.
I think from a guy who started, if I'm looking at rookie minicamp to the end of minicamp, I think he's easily was the most improved player out there on the field. I don't even think it's close. Like, I know there's some other ones out there, but you saw each week how comfortable he got, how much more he got as far as the workload and the reps. So look, I don't think it's a bad take at all. I think it's a strong take. And I just think Haener, another year in this offense, and the fact that he is going into the second year, that's probably why I lean more to him getting the job when it's all said and done.
I just want to give a quick example before we move to the next position here of like, we were talking about like Sean Payton play calls and things like that. So I went out, I always like try to go out and find one to kind of give people an example just in case they haven't heard them before, everything. So this is the play call. And look, any coach that's watching or listening to this, you're going to hear me put emphasis in the wrong place and stuff like that. I don't know the play call. This is back from 2009. Yeah, this is the Super Bowl play call for the 2-point conversion pass to Lance Moore. Bunch right, tear /37, weak F, and then kill, Q8, solid Z, speed, smash. So that's actually 2 play calls in one. So there's the 1 play call, which is bunch right, tear /37, weak F. And then there's kill. And so basically you would probably hear, I'm sure any Saints fan would remember Drew Brees going line yelling, kill, 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 kill. So there'd be the kill call, which is the second play that you could change to, which was Q8 solid Z speed smash. And so that's the play calling style of a Sean Payton. It will be a little bit more simplified than that with this Klint Kubiak offense in 2024.
Yeah, and you got to think that I don't know how many plays. I think that's actually a pretty good question for Klint Kubiak. Is like, how many plays are in that playbook? You know what I mean? Not like he's trying to give it up, but like kind of a roundabout. How many plays are these guys actually learning? Because I think when you look at training camp, they're going to be installing new stuff every week, and it's just like a building block and stuff. So I think we'll see more and more. But I think that is a pretty fair question, maybe at one point, and maybe it's not a public one, but like, just out of curiosity, I'm curious at least, like how many actual plays does a Klint Kubiak have or his offense have? Because I'm sure it's probably 100 or 200. Maybe I'm selling it short. I don't know. Maybe it's
sure
less. Maybe it's
thick.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's one of you remember those tall call sheets from Sean Payton that the broadcasts always would like zoom in on and everything. So man's like, don't give it away. And I'm like, can you decipher what that actually means though? I mean, that's the other thing. So but quarterback,
so good.
Super important position. Obviously, again, Carr is the guy.
Yeah.
I'm worried about Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. And again, we don't want to just glance over Nathan Peterman, but again, I wrote about the positions today. And again, with Nathan Peterman, he could be a practice squad, priority on the practice squad. He's worked with Andrew Janocko in the past. He's worked with some of these guys. And so there is familiarity there. And look, if he does play well, then it makes it a little bit interesting, but he is a veteran. So it's easier to put him on the practice squad. And if you think about emergency quarterback, you can call up a quarterback as many times as you want, but they do count for your standard elevation. So they could designate him as like the emergency quarterback, but you can't like abuse the rule this year. So it's just some food for thought. I think it's a piece of information, but quarterbacks, super important. Win or lose games, it's all their fault or they get all the glory, right?
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. All right. So let's go to running back. And I'm going to rope in the fullbacks with this too, just because we can talk about them afterwards. But running back position, we know it's Alvin Kamara. It's Kendre Miller, like we always like to talk. Inside joke for some people, they won't get it. Jamaal Williams, Jordan Mims, James Robinson, and then Jacob Kibodi. And then in your 2 fullbacks are Adam Prentice. And then you've got Zander Horvath. So we know the running backs. We talked about it last week in depth. Again, go back to our last episode. We talked about the Alvin Kamara situation in depth. And again, I don't, and maybe you can give me your 2 pennies on this one too, which it's actually worth a lot more than 2 pennies, your opinion. But, this Kamara situation's a week before. I don't think it's still time to hit the panic button on that, but that is the biggest storyline right now for the Saints is what is the status of Alvin Kamara? Is he going to be at training camp day one when they start practicing on Wednesday morning, or is he going to be a holdout, and is it going to be a distraction? I think that's the biggest question mark for this team right now.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting to see how it gets played because holdouts are really tough with the new CBA. You get fined a ton of money now for every practice that you miss and all that. And so I don't know if it hold out, hold in right there, but not participating kind of a thing. I would expect whatever that situation to be, whether it's a holdout or a hold in, to probably take place at some point during the first week. I'd be surprised if this was taken care of before training camp began in earnest on the 24th. But certainly we'll see too, because look, not a lot of this is probably relevant to the team or to Alvin Kamara in 2024. A lot of it's more about where's the guaranteed money in 2025? Like, where's the commitment to the team or by the team to the player in 2025? All these other things. So look, this could go any way, but I would be surprised if it is fully taken care of and that, the kind of book on this is closed by the time that training camp begins. I think training camp begins and then this situation gets taken care of and wrapped up while they're all in California. That's kind of the way that I would look at it.
Yeah, and then the biggest thing for Kamara is once he's in this offense, of course, they see him kind of like this Christian McCaffrey type thing. And of course, there's all these comparisons that you can draw. But, look, Kamara was suspended the first 3 games last year, and he missed the season finale because of injury. Some of the usage and efficiency he had last year and his touches just weren't where they needed to be. And some of that is the offensive play calling. Some of that's the offensive line. Some of that might be decision making. But I think we both are banking on Alvin Kamara having a much better season this year, being used properly, and even being used better than what he has been used in the past several years. And again, for Kamara, he's a guy that I don't think is necessarily showing any signs of slowing down. He's still in tip-top shape. His physique is there. I looked at it when I looked at, potentially giving what a contract extension would look like on Saints News Network. I broke it down as there's still running backs out there that just because you hit the late 20s and you're in your 30s, you can still have success. And we saw it last year with Raheem Mostert. I mean, that was one of the prime examples. We've seen it in the past with Adrian Peterson. There's other running backs out there. It's not a death, and it's just not as common today in today's NFL that if you're in that late 20s, early 30s, then you're kind of like stick a fork in you. But I mean, you've talked about it before. We've seen Latavius Murray come in here and do pretty well towards the back end of his career. So, but Kamara, the hope is that he's used properly, more efficiently. And I mean, when it's all said and done, does he return to a Pro Bowl caliber player if all the other things add up the way it should?
Yeah, I think he has the opportunity to. I was a little bit surprised. Aaron Schatz, who does DVOA over at FTN Fantasy now as well, their chief analytics officer, he has this sort of statistic for, whether or not an offensive line is producing in the run game by breaking out what yards are created by an offensive line versus what yards are picked up in the open field. And Saints offensive line in 2024 or 2023, was actually 7th in that metric. I was very surprised by that. Very, very surprised by that because I didn't see that. I saw the Saints offensive line get walked back more than them actually pushing upfield. So I think a little bit of it is swollen by their success with Taysom Hill as a runner and everything. And then maybe that kind of bolstered that metric up a little bit. But I do think there is something of the way that, like, if Alvin Kamara is able to get into the open field more and take advantage of those open field opportunities, which is what this offense is designed to do in terms of its run game, then I think you get a much better Alvin Kamara out of it. I don't know if he becomes a Pro Bowler again. So much of that has to do with like popularity and who's going to vote for who kind of a thing at this point.
Right. Yeah.
But, does it get him back to, if nothing else, double-digit touchdowns scored in 2024? I think that's what you're hoping for. Is at least that. And so I do think that there is the opportunity there for him to be able to take advantage of those things. But I am curious to see what he's able to create with more open field opportunities and if he's actually able to take advantage of that. If not, then that's where a guy like Kendre Miller becomes really, really in focus. Because while Kendre Miller doesn't have a lot of outside zone experience, he has a lot of zone run experience, just mostly between the tackles, and does a very good job in the open field. So if he acclimates the outside zone run, which effectively has similar styles of blocking, like it's all the same, it's all a similar blocking scheme. Nonetheless, you're just looking for holes in different areas. But if he's able to break plays open in the open field for, a team that lacked, they had no 10 plus rush or 20 plus rushing yards from any of their running backs. Very little, if any, when it came to 10 plus. That's where I think things can really, really change, is if Alvin Kamara is not able to take advantage of those open field opportunities, but then Kendre Miller is.
Yeah, and look, we saw 2 plays on one drive that and during minicamp that just kind of like really got us excited. It's like, where in the world has this been? It was the screenplay to Kamara and it was the wheel
Mhm.
route to Kamara. Like
That
those
to
should
me
be
is big.
staples. Like those
Yeah.
should be staples in this offense. Like you should have a better screen game here, and you should get Kamara on a linebacker and get the mismatch because it's going to either open up somebody else or he's going to beat that linebacker. And I just don't understand for the life of me why we haven't seen a lot of that in the past several years. But again, I think we saw a teaser, right? And I
Yeah, I got a
expect to
little bit
see
of it.
more. But it's funny you bring up you bring up Kendre Miller. I think he's in for a really big year. Obviously it's different for him this time last year. He was still going through the rehab process, right? And so he's had a full off season now. He's been around. He's been in this offense as well, and he's benefited obviously since Kamara wasn't here early on, but here for minicamp. And with Kendre Miller, of course, we know that he has some strong potential. That Falcons finale game showed it, but he showed us that even before then, games like against New England and some stuff in Chicago, like different ones that, he was able to do. I kind of think that when Kamara is, even if they have everything, if everybody's healthy and they have the workload, I think Kamara is still going to get like 50 to 60% of the snaps. I think
Oh, yeah.
Kendre Miller's probably going to get up more than what he has, probably in that 20 to 25% range. And then maybe it's more Jamaal Williams, which Jamal's good on third down blocking, blitz pickups, all those types of things. But what's the ceiling for Kendre Miller this year? I think we've talked about him maybe even having better receiving output than Kamara when it's all said and done, or a better rushing output. I know we've said that on past episodes, but what's your kind of fresh take here?
Yeah, no, I would think so. I would think that the ceiling for him is probably, getting to that, you know, 40-45% area to where he's like heavily utilized. And that would mean potentially a split between he and AK at that level. And then, Jamaal Williams, the additional 20% or something like that. Like if we're trying to break it cleanly amongst three, which is obviously, of course, never going to be the case.
Right.
But, I think that like that's kind of the thing you're looking for, is him potentially threatening a little bit to get to those numbers. I think that the other thing you're looking for though with Kendre is not necessarily, because even when you look back at 2017, 2018, like Mark Ingram was still the percentage holder big time when it came to the, snap numbers and things like that at the position. But Alvin Kamara's rushing totals, because of his rushing average and then his usability in the passing game and all those other things, his yardage totals were still really good. And so I think if you get a level of efficiency from Kendre Miller, he doesn't have to dominate to be, dominate percentage wise to have a large role with the team.
Right.
He could have a 30% snap weight and then still put up a lot of yardage based on efficiency and production based upon how he's utilized. So I think that's the thing that you're looking at. What I was just looking up too, just in terms of the screen game, was Derek Carr threw 26 screen passes to running backs last season during the regular season. Kirk Cousins in 2021 through 25. So not a big difference in terms of what that was. I'm curious to see if that changes though with an Alvin Kamara, with a Kendre Miller, when you have the weapons that you can utilize at that position in a way that maybe Minnesota didn't in 2021 when Clint Kubiak was calling plays there.
Yeah, and again, I think it's one of those that I don't know if we'll see the full playbook on display. I think that's the question that we've had is how much of this Kubiak offense we're actually going to see. You know what I mean? And I expect to see a good bit, but like the play action staples are there, the motion, all those types of things. That's a staple, so we should expect to see a lot of it. But I'm with you. I think Miller could be on the rebound, and I've seen some things. I think he's in strong shape. I do know that with as far as the playbook goes, I mean, it's complex for everybody, but I think him being around and showing some things is going to only benefit him more in the second year. But again, it remains to be seen. Jamaal Williams, talking about him, I think people have talked about him as a cut candidate, but we've talked about it on this show that he's a different running style,
Yeah.
different running style and different type of back. But I think he's somebody that can have a much better year in New Orleans than his first year. It's not going to be like what he did in his final year before joining the Saints and put up all those touchdowns. But again, you look at things like the blitz pickups and third down, all that dirty work and stuff. He's a guy that excels at that where, let's face it, you don't want guys like Alvin doing that necessarily, although they could, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
but where do you see Jamaal Williams? Is he truly a guy on the roster bubble, or is it the fact that, because of his skill set that he has, he seems pretty safe?
Yeah, I think he seems pretty safe. I mean, a zone heavy run team, it just means that they're going to run the majority of their offense in those zone blocking schemes. It's not a 80%, 90% zone run team. You still need those guys that are going to be able to run between the tackles. And I think Taysom helps you out there. Kendre has the ability to do that, of course, too, and all those things. So yeah, I think that like all of that could mean a little bit of a reduction in terms of in terms of Jamaal Williams snaps, but they also love what he can do as a pass protector. And I think that's huge. Like that's going to keep him out on the field big time. They've been utilizing him a bit on special teams as a potential second returner. And because of the fact that he would be a good blocker in those situations, that's another reason why he ends up doing that. So I think that there are roles outside of the common assumption of what a running back will do that will end up keeping him out on the field. And so I look at that part. And the other thing that I'll mention in that too is that like when it comes to Jamaal, he also has experience in these types of systems. He did it with Green Bay. And he has seen it up close and personal facing San Francisco and things like that. He used to have a pass catching background and was utilized a little bit more as a pass catcher with Green Bay as well. So I think that too, like his versatility might be beyond what it is that people might expect in an offense like this.
For sure. Yeah. And I could see it too. And of course I expect to see more of that in camp. And I think the other part of it too is we've seen Jamaal Williams more on special teams, doing more special teams work than we have ever seen him do, I think, ever. And so I think that's another thing where he's trying to find some other ways to get involved as well. And so again, I think that could also bode well. The other three guys on the roster, you're talking about Jordan Mims, who I think we're a little bit higher on than some people. Jacob Kibodi, their undrafted rookie out of UL Lafayette, and then James Robinson, a guy who used to be a kind of a thing, but kind of fizzled out and stuff. Do you expect anything from them that could make the Saints say, maybe we keep a fourth running back, especially because of the new return rule, or is it kind of one of those things where I think we're pretty set where we're at, and then kind of see how the numbers play out with the others?
Yeah, I think it's going to probably come down to the numbers on the roster as a whole. Like, can you afford to keep that fourth running back? But I definitely think you're going to see one or two of those guys at the very least on the practice squad. All three of them are unique fits for what it is that the New Orleans Saints want to do. Kibodi didn't get a lot of opportunity during his time at UL to show what he could do, as a pass catcher, but he was excited to show that. I thought he looked pretty good there. Jordan Mims is somebody that like loves this new system, and he loves not only being a receiver out of the backfield, he likes being lined up out wide and in the slot and all these other things, and being a true viable option in those looks as well. So I think that there's a piece of that. And James Robinson has excelled in outside zone runs before in his career when he had that 1,000-yard season over at Jacksonville. So he's all three of these guys should be able to make a case to at least stick around on the practice squad, if nothing else.
For sure. And I think if anybody, Mims, he would be the guy that I think could make final cuts a little bit interesting.
Agreed.
But of course, we got a long ways to go before that. But I just think based off of conversations and just his willingness to come in here and learn and all the things that, the Saints were really high on him coming out of the draft and all these other things, that he could be somebody to watch. I'm not going to tell you he's going to make the final roster or anything. And even if he does, he could be a frequent inactive too. So there's always that even if you make the roster, you might be sitting on the bench too. Fullback. Everybody forgets about the fullback position. The Saints are obviously a team that still uses a fullback. You got Adam Prentice versus Zander Horvath. As far as their new running backs coach that was brought over from the Chargers, he has some familiarity with Horvath as well. And then you're looking at Adam Prentice, who's been around here for a little bit. And, we don't tend to get excited about a fullback, competition, I guess, in some aspects, but this is a team that uses them. What is your take on this battle, and what do you think plays out?
Yeah, I'm really interested in this part because do the Saints keep a fullback by position, or do they utilize guys that can line up there? Not to jump too far ahead in the conversation, but if you have like 3 different tight ends that can be in that conversation, including Taysom Hill, that could give you some fullback snaps as well. So I look at it as, one of these guys probably has to like really, really stand out. Zander Horvath, of course, being the new face is really intriguing. He has the experience of somebody that, is playing in sort of this type of system. He told us during his introduction press conference, John, that like this is the type of system he's always wanted to play in. Like he's always wanted to do this and stuff. And then he also has the connection to new running backs coach Derek Foster too. So they both came over from the Chargers last year. So I think like he is the one that maybe is as well positioned as you can to come in and compete with an incumbent. But I liked your idea from a few weeks ago of the idea like how do you utilize potentially the practice squad to handle this position.
Yeah, and of course it's easier for a guy like Prentice. I mean, that's how they've done it. Is you're not going to put a roster spot. They put him on the practice squad, elevate him when they need him for depending on the game plan. Which, again, based off of some of the things that they have early on the schedule, I imagine that they're going to want to use him as well. But again, it's not a overly huge deal, I guess, in some aspects. But I do think that when it's all said and done, the Saints are going to continue to use a fullback a lot. And of course, we're not going to sit here and compare either of them to Kyle Juszczyk, but because they've talked about Taysom Hill doing that, lining up at fullback, playing that. Like it's just a lot of different things that could happen. I like Prentice. I love what he's able to do. I think Horvath being a little bit younger and having a little bit more experience, especially with Derek Foster, it could bode better for him in some aspects. But, I kind of also look at the special teams rule is that they in primary formations, they've used a fullback. They've used them in return game and they've used them on cover teams. So I could see that happening, that one of these guys is going to be more of a role player on this team. But right now, I had to guess, I'd say it's Horvath. I'd give him the slight advantage just right now, but
yeah,
can't sleep on that.
Yeah, I think so too.
I would say that for sure.
Yeah.
So, couple positions down, and we're just scratching the surface. And then I'm going to get I have a question on here. I've been waiting to see this one too, but let's talk about the wide receiver spot. Let's move over to them. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. We've talked about the receiver spot a lot, but we know those two guys, obviously. Cedric Wilson Jr. has been in the slot. We've yet to see Stanley Morgan Jr., except from a kind of a rehab basis and all that. Equinemius Nate Brown, who had some interesting things to say about Dragos and all that other stuff. It was in the Super Bowl. Won't really get into
I'm not
that.
anti Dragos, but I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna judge New Orleans cuisine, maybe go more places than just Dragos first.
Yeah, Dragos is like that touristy place. Like Dragos is good.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but like if you want the seafood experience, like I'm probably choosing somewhere else other than Dragos. That's not the New Orleans staple that I'm like. Oh,
now we're never getting sponsored by Dragos. Dang.
Yeah, sorry, Dragos. My bad. We'll change our tune if you come to the table, just like I said.
Yeah, easy.
And we talked about Bub Means, and then obviously you're looking at undrafted guys like Mason Tipton on there, and Jermaine Jackson. I was going to say Jeremiah Jackson. Nope, Jermaine Jackson. And so wide receiver, although kind of a little bit cloudy in some aspects, and of course A.T. Perry. Why am I forgetting A.T. Perry? I shouldn't be forgetting A.T. Perry. But we've talked about it. How many do they keep? Keith Williams, their wide receivers coach, we know this guy is going to make such a large impact on this group. It's one of those where I honestly put 5 out there, and I think they're all going to excel in some aspects one way or another. But, we talked about it. Did they keep 5? Did they keep 6? What do you see in this wide receiver competition? What excites you most, I guess, about this receiver room and where they might be able to go?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not exciting to anybody else, but I love the fact that the Saints might finally have like a quintessential slot receiver again. They haven't really had that since, what is it safe to say, Willie Snead, probably. Lance Moore before that. And then obviously like the big slot option of guys like Marcus Colston and Michael Thomas who can move inside and out. They still have that with a guy like Chris Olave. And I think you would get that from Bub Means as well. 6'1", 212. So like he's above 6 foot, 200 plus pounds. So you can call him like a big slot if you want to. But like really like a big slot option here is Cedric Wilson Jr., who's big. and played his best football with the Dallas Cowboys playing in the slot. And I think just having that option where the Saints could have, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, who they can move around, A.T. Perry, who they can play purely on the outside for the most part. And when I say purely, nothing's pure in the NFL. So 90 something percent of the time, right? Cedric Wilson, you can do the same thing within the slot. And then a guy like, Equidemi St. Brown can move around. A guy like Mason Tipton could move around. A guy like Bub Means could move around. So it's just really interesting, like, to have maybe a little bit more of a specialized focus. It was kind of the reason why we thought they might go after Hunter Renfrow, was to get that guy. But seeing Clint Kubiak come from San Francisco, who had Juwan Jennings, and then bringing in a guy like Cedric Wilson, it's not that hard to see maybe what the vision there could be. And that's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm excited to see guys like Mason Tipton, if they can make something more interesting. We're looking at, I think him and Jermaine Jackson are both practice squad guys for sure, without even doing much. Tipton, just because of the way they've been using, I love his acceleration, I love his burst, I love the fact that he's got a lot of underrated tools, and that seems like a pretty good find. I know the Kyle Sheets thing didn't work out, and I think we kind of aren't too surprised by that, but. With this receiver room, again, Stanley Morgan Jr., he's got an uphill battle to climb right now. You know what I mean? And you mentioned Cedric Wilson in Dallas, and I don't think that Wilson is a guy that would put up a ton of yards. You know what I mean? But I think it'd be better than the past couple of seasons that he's had, and could be more in line of what he had with Dallas. But, you can't overlook this receiving core and not look at him. I think Rashid Shaheed's in for a big year, right? And we know
Big
Chris
time.
Olave is going to be a wide receiver 1. And so, for this receiver room, it is going to be fascinating to see if they add to it. Look, I'm going to throw this in here at the moment because NOF, shout out to them. They had Willie Snead on their show, and we're talking about the Clint Kubiak offense, and he talked about he wanted to come back and retire as a Saint. And obviously he's productive in this offense. He obviously knows a thing or two being with San Francisco and such, but do they roll the dice on a guy like Willie Snead, or you say, no, I think we're kind of good with what we got? Or, what are your quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I took come back and retire as a Saint as like sign a 1-year deal and one day deal and like retire as a Saint. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I took to mean. But maybe I'm wrong because I haven't seen the whole thing. But like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that's necessarily something I roll the dice on. I think that like the team's focus on infusing young talent and not necessarily doing the like going back to guys that have been on the team before makes a lot of sense. I think that like you're already struggling right now to pick 5 of these receivers to make the roster and figure out who the 5th one is, and then a potential for a 6th one, knowing that you've got the kick return rules that you have to be ready for and stuff like that. Like, I take all that into account. Love Willie Snead, love what it is that he did for the organization during his time here. I hope that he does get the opportunity to retire as a Saint. It's interesting how many players still want to come back to New Orleans and retire as a Saint. I think that's a good thing. I think that's good news.
Right.
And now you're seeing guys like Josh Hill come back and join the scouting staff and stuff like that. Like, awesome. And so I think all that's really, really cool. And I never want to take away from any of that. But I think that the team's focus on modernity in today's NFL requires a focus on young talent too.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And again, Willie did a lot of good things. You can memorize
awesome.
a lot of, remember a lot of the plays that he made, especially being a good target for Drew and just doing so much. Another undrafted rookie that came in and, was one of those next big ones that did a lot for the organization and stuff. And so I'm sure he'll get a crack somewhere and stuff. I just don't know if it's New Orleans, you know what I mean? But I get that. And it's cool to see sentiments. I mean, guys like Craig Robertson, who didn't play a ton, like didn't play his whole entire career here, but like he got the retirement treatment and stuff too, from the team. And so, I mean, it happens more often than not. And it's something to be said about this organization. I do like this question, and this is the one I've been eyeballing, but obviously, you know what the 49ers are going through with Brandon Ayuk right now. He's requested a trade. The 49ers have said they're not trading. We know this. We know how this goes on. It's the strong arm. Yeah. It's doing all this, but the back half of the question is really what's more important is looking at Chris Olave's situation. How do they approach him? Because right now he's in year 3. So next year, and they have the 5th year option on him, but is when do you start the contract negotiations with a guy like Olave? Are they banking on saying, let's see what you got this year as our wide receiver one, and then maybe we can pick those conversations up? Or, do you think there's not in a real hurry and say, well, we got the 5th-year option, let's just make sure and use that, and then we'll see about where we're at then?
Yeah, I think you revisit it. I think you start having the deeper conversations of a longer contract after the 2025 season. You pick up the after this year, this offseason, they'll be eligible to pick up the 5th-year option as he goes into his 4th season. At that point, because you have the 5th-year option, he can play throughout 2025 on his 4th year. And then after 2025 going into 2026, then you broach that conversation. I'm making the case that Chris Olave could be the first 30 a year wide receiver by the time that we get there. Just looking at looking at the percentage of increase in wide receiver contracts from 2 years ago to now, which now gets it up to 25 in that area. That same percentage increase going into 2 years from now, 2026, would also get it to 30 per year. So that would be a pretty logical contract at that time. It looks insane now, but it'd be a pretty standard, probably market contract at that point. So I think Chris Olave is really like the next guy on the Saints roster that can actually reset a market potentially.
Yep.
And he's got 2 years to prove that now. And so I think that like there's no rush in any of that. That's one of those things that they'll be able to come back to in a couple of years. And ideally by then he's established himself as the number one. Because I think that's the other big difference too. Like you look at the teams that are having issues with their wide receivers right now, with the exception of the Cowboys, which I don't get it. I don't understand what the issue is there. But when it comes down to like San Francisco, they just paid Deebo Samuel. When it comes down to Cincinnati, that not only do they have T. Higgins, but they got to figure out how much they're going to pay Jamar Chase. And so there's always the other receiver that has already set a market or is pending to set a market or tease a market or something like that. There's nobody like that on this New Orleans Saints roster. And so it's going to be Chris Olave. And then by then you'll have already probably reached some type of an extension deal with Rashid Shaheed, because he'll be a restricted free agent next offseason, which gives you an opportunity to do maybe a little bit of a shorter term extension with him, but not necessarily a top dollar extension. So you'll already have wide receiver 2 potentially locked down at that point on a reasonable deal, which it gives you the opportunity in terms of position spending to go out there and potentially set a market or reset a market with Chris Olave. So I think they'll be in good position for that if he proves over the next 2 years that that's what he is, which I think
yeah, for sure. And the market could also reset and it could look differently in 2 years too.
Yeah.
I mean,
plus
it's
salary
like
cap's
now
going to look mad different in 2 years too.
There's so many factors, but I am a supporter of waiting. You know what I'm saying? And again, we've talked about the Paulson Adebo. I think he's the next guy that they could get done before week 1. Agreed. They've done it with guys like Carl Granderson in the past. They've taken care of guys like Alvin or Eric McCoy, whoever the case may be. They've done it with some of these players. And so I don't think that, I think it's probably something in the back of their mind, but we shouldn't have to worry about this for a couple of years. And let's see how Olave does. I think he's in for a big year, but this is a run first mentality type of team. He's going to be somebody that's going to be relied on to move the sticks. They don't have a Michael Thomas anymore. It's just one of those that it remains to be seen, but I think Olave can be that guy. But when it comes down to it, when it's time, they're going to have to make a decision, especially with them trying to work back towards the cap. It'll be fascinating to see how it goes in what would be like 2026, 2027, roughly. I mean, that's a ways away.
yeah. You got time. You got time on that one.
Yeah, for sure. Numbers July says Shaheed motion or in the slot every play. Yeah, look, I think moving Shaheed around is probably one of the best things you can do. Jet sweep.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see him out of the backfield every now and then.
We've talked about that
kind of stuff.
Yep, absolutely. So for sure. All right. Well, tight ends. Let's go to there, which we know about Juwan Johnson.
Right.
Not going to be available. I think what we heard was the 6 to 8 week time frame kind of roughly is where we're looking at. But again, I wouldn't expect him anytime soon, right? So now you're looking at Taysom Hill, which for all intents and purposes is going to be there, right? And then you're looking at Foster Moreau with increased role. Dallin Holker, we know what he's been able to do in camp. I think he's somebody that, again, we've talked about that could end up easily making this roster, not just from a numbers perspective, but like just because of what he's been able to do early on, and we're excited to see what he's going to be able to do in training camp. Then you're kind of looking at, other guys like a Michael Jacobson, a Tommy Hudson, and then they picked up Jesper Horsted, a guy that was with the Raiders previously, more of a, didn't really do too much, but, tight end group, they could add, Jimmy Graham's still out there, you know what I mean? If they do decide to do something like that, but I'm kind of interested to see what they're going to do. Is it going to be more increased work for Foster and Dallin Holker and Taysom Hill, or do they add to the room? But, you've talked to Clancy Barone a lot. His thoughts kind of impact and stuff. What is your kind of view on this tight end room right now?
Yeah, I think right now there's probably a little bit of like a little bit of a deflation at the moment in terms of like what the expectation was around, Juwan was so excited to get back out on the field, be able to continue the momentum from the end of the 2023 season. Now that's kind of got a little bit of a hiccup, but the expectation is still that he could be ready to begin the season. Question is, will he have the opportunity to come in and acclimate before that? And so that will be the big thing. But I would expect probably a little bit more of a boost for Foster Morrow, a little bit more of a boost for Taysom Hill, and then whoever the other tight end is. We're assuming Dallin Holker right now, just because the dude has looked really, really good throughout mini camps and OTAs. But look, they could go another direction. They could roll again with a Jesper Horsted. They could, or not roll again with a Jesper Horsted, but they could, after signing Jesper Horsted, maybe look to roll with him as somebody that's got some familiarity with Carr along with Morrow. And so I think that they have some options there to figure out, does Michael Jacobson, who made plays every now and then and, kind of had his flashes and stuff like that during mini camps and OTAs, could he potentially do something, especially at his frame too? Like he is a potential red zone threat at 6 foot plus or so. So but I think the big thing is, what does this room look like when it's all back together? What does it look like when they're at full capacity? Because if it's still lacking, then I think you go into 2025 with tight end being a big time need for this team. And so I think that that's the thing that I'm most interested in, not necessarily how they navigate the withoutness, but how it is that they excel when they have all the pieces. And if not, how important that will be to address later.
Yeah, I think it's uncertain for sure. And again, I like the concept of a lot of it, but they're one more injury away from it being not a good situation, right? I mean, that's just kind of the big thing that comes down into it. And, again, that's the unfortunate part of the NFL and how things roll. And you hope nothing like that happens, but it's going to have to work. Like, you're going to have these guys do what they need to do from the start. And, not having Juwan, that definitely hurts. And, we've looked at the free agent market. It's not much. It's like pretty lacking, obviously. And so then you might say, okay, maybe they make a trade if they were that desperate in some aspects. But, again, Michael Jacobson showed us some things during OTA's mini camp and stuff. And so I'm curious to see if he's going to be able to step up a little bit more, and probably having some more, some role in in training camp with Juwan being out. And so it'll be something to play out. But again, I think Holker is probably the guy that we all are excited to see. And I said this too, when we wrote about him or we talked about it, he's going to be everybody's like darling, like, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but just the guy's so easy to like and to root for. And he's just somebody that can make the plays and do all the things. And like you said, way back when, he's one of one, man. And so it's cool to see him do things. So it's an area where they've got to kind of get some production there. And of course, tight ends are going to be important to this success in the Kubiak offense too. Go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, no, you were exactly there. That was the big thing too, was, if they really do lean in on these two tight end sets, as it sounds like they're going to, then it elevates the importance of that position even more. It's not that you need your top guy to be healthy. You need your top guys to be healthy. And so any of those injuries is impacting a second layer, not just like being one tight end out on the field. Yeah,
for sure. And that's an area we're going to be paying close attention to. So I don't think it's not like it's you don't overlook anyone's, but it's probably not a as much talked about position, I think, in my opinion, the tight end room, but it's going to be a big deal. Right. And so we'll see how that plays out. All right, our last position, and we're going to touch on kicker too, but offensive line, most important position, right? a lot of players to come to the table, and so let's start it. I'll see if I'm gonna test my knowledge, see if I can remember everybody too. So obviously, what we looked at in OTA's minicamp, looking at Taliesin Fuanga, who was on the left side. You got Nick Saldivario, left guard, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Trevor Penning. You have Justin Herron, Oli Udo, Shane Lemieux, Lucas Patrick, Mark Evans, Landon Young, Kyle Hergel. Then you also have Nori Nuili, and then I might be forgetting one or two, maybe, perhaps, but I think that's most of them.
Yeah,
maybe it's
you got
them.
Might have
got all of
them.
them.
And then Ryan Ramczyk is technically still on the roster, right? But we know that he's probably unlikely to play. So yeah, but it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, that was another one we talked about the pup too. But I mean, I think next week, I don't see why we shouldn't know where Ryan Ramczyk's future is. Like we know, but just say it. Like know. Oh, Josiah Azira. That was another one. Thank you, Rose City. I did forget about him. Yes, thank you. Almost there. 99% mostly. So
you nailed it.
But this offensive line, man, again, I think a lot of it hinges on it. We've talked plenty about the offensive line, and if those three young guys can come in and make it happen and start, man, it's a beautiful thing. But it's also a rookie, a second-year player that we're talking about, and then a third-year player in Trevor Penning who just hasn't lived up to his potential. And so, again, he's a big focal point here. I think the left guard, we've talked about guys like Oli Udo getting more looks, or Lucas Patrick and Shane Lemieux. They've been in a version of this offense. And guys like Justin Herron, we don't overlook them at tackle potentially, or, and obviously Landon Young is an interchangeable part. But I don't know. We've talked about this previous episodes, but based off of where the offensive line was a couple months ago, maybe post-draft or pre-draft, do you feel better about where this Saints offensive line is at, or do you feel like I'm still a little bit nervous and I just kind of want to see how this comes together?
I feel a vast and empty unknowingness when it comes to the offensive line at the moment.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I am. So I guess that kind of puts me into that second class of the ladder of what you described. But I also look at the San Francisco 49ers offensive line, which has a really, really good left tackle, and that's about it. I look at the Miami Dolphins offensive line, which is a really, where they really kind of focused in at right tackle. Tua's left-handed, so blindside being on the right side. And then that's kind of it. So they kind of just went out and they because of the system and because of the scheme, and these are both two Shanahan systems, of course, I should probably highlight. They went out there and they got the quarterback protector, and then the scheme allowed them to just kind of say, okay, and then fill out the rest. And I think if the Saints get the right left tackle, which could be Taliesin Fuanga, if that's the way they decide to go permanently, your first round pick, just invested in them. All signs point to yes, when it comes to that. And you have one of the league's best centers in Eric McCoy. You have a really good interior offensive lineman in Cesar Ruiz. And if you have the scheme and the system to be able to do what it is that San Francisco and Miami have done from an offensive line standpoint, right, in terms of supporting your offensive line, you have to be the most explosive offenses in the NFL, then you might also be fine. And so I think about the idea that you're waiting for three pieces to pan out that are younger, right? A third-year guy, a second-year guy, and a first-year guy, when really you might just need the first-year guy to pan out right away.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the line is supported by the system, and in the run game is being asked to play to its strengths. And in the passing game, getting the ball out quickly, using motion, using play action to freeze some of the pass rush, freeze some of the second-level supplemental rush and things like that. Maybe the system does it to where all you really need is one of those three guys to really pan out. And then the other guys, lanyap from there. And so if they could set themselves up in that situation, which is it's a task, it's not simple, but if they can find a way to do that, then it certainly lessens the amount of that unknowingness that I described.
Sure. And Trevor Penning's the guy that's under the microscope. I think he's under the most pressure. He's the guy that's under the microscope the most right now for it. And, they've given him a fresh slate. And, I talked to John Benton a lot. And so we've seen it, right? Kubiak feels good about him right now. Everything has been positive on Pennings. Now, there's some times in camp, we said he's on the ground a little bit. We're going to wait to see how that transpires in camp. And of course, they're not doing fully padded practices, but they're about to. So it's about to ramp up the intensity. You're going to have all those things, and we're going to really get a dose of where he's at for sure. Again, I like the concept of Nick Saldiveri. We talked to Jeff Ireland at the Senior Bowl. He said him and Penning were guys that they envisioned competing to start for a role. And so I think Saldiveri's getting a fair shake, but the additions, the veteran guys they brought in that have been in a form of this system, the Oli Udos or the Lucas Patricks or the Shane Lemieux and then even, Justin Heron, a guy that played for Vegas. I think their veteran outlook is pretty good. And Benjamin and Aston kind of tandem with this, no additional depth brought in for the O-line. Is that a good sign that the coaches might be optimistic? I would think so. I mean, now, you got a week now, and you got to remember last year they brought Trey Turner in, during training camp. And so I think that's obviously something to keep an eye on. And of course, we know this offensive line is not going to last 18 games, right? Or 18 weeks. So it's just how it goes across the NFL. But these backups are just as important as the starters, right? And so I look forward to seeing what a Lucas Patrick does or what a Oli Udo does, because we didn't see much of Oli Udo because he's kind of injured or rehabbing, not injured, but coming back from injury and stuff. And so it'll be a fun time to watch this offensive line, and there's just too many to keep an eye on, you know what I mean, in some aspects. But joint practices with the 49ers are going to be really interesting, you know what I mean?
You're going to learn a lot. Yep, going to learn a lot.
Yes, sir.
And they've got 12 total padded practices, not including those 49ers joint practices, but also including, you'll be able to see yourself, Saints fans, a padded practice at the Superdome, I believe that one's a padded practice and stuff like that. So like those will be pretty big too, which I think will be quite helpful.
Yeah. Question on Ramczyk that came back. Numbers don't lie. He says, is Ram available for second half of the season and playoffs? I don't think he's going to eat football ever again. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not sure, man.
I think there was a lot of concerns about him losing so much weight. And I just don't know if his body's even there at this point. You know what I mean? And of course, they're not going to rule out anything, but what you've talked about his knee issue, it's not something that just gets better, right? Like it's a degenerative knee issue, and they took one course of treatment on it. And so it started seeming like it was going to be a positive outlook. And then it took a turn, right? It took a turn when we talked to DA at the owners meeting and such in Florida. And so, again, I would not count Ryan Ramczyk being in on this team in 2024. And we might have seen the last of him. But, this offensive line, I'm interested to see guys like Kyle Hergel. Can he do more? A Mark Evans, even a guy that they brought on from the practice squad, HBCU guy. Can he make more of his opportunities? And so there's all those types of things that we'll get more answers on. But again, if this offensive line doesn't come together, this Clint Kubiak offense doesn't work. It's
the offense goes the way. Yeah, it's going to go the way of the line without a doubt.
Yep,
without a doubt.
And we've pointed out they're going to be tested early. You got Philly and Dallas. You got Dallas week 2. You got Philly week 3, and then you got Kansas City week 6. Like, you're going to be really tested on this offensive line. And of course, I'm not going to race to judgment, but we're going to find out quickly where this offensive line is at, because you're facing some really talented, and I'd even throw Carolina in there. And like, I mean, I don't think they're obviously not as bad as they have been, but they've revamped some things with Clowney and all sorts of other ones. So they're worth keeping an eye on. Like, if you can't manhandle the Panthers
if you can't
you know what I'm saying? Like,
it's
still important to keep an eye on. You know what I mean? That's more what I'm saying. Not saying in front, because for the life of me, I just didn't know what they were doing in free agency, and I don't even know if the Panthers know what they're doing. But it's a struggle bus over there. So that's their offensive positions we talked about, and then of course you mentioned we'll talk about the kicker spot, right? So
let's do it.
Let's talk about kicker. Blake Grupe, second year. And then you got Charlie Smyth coming on board, and Charlie Smyth has a fantastic story. Obviously, he's one of the rookies that have reported today and such. But, the biggest thing is kind of way it's set up is, and Dennis Allen said this too, Charlie Smyth has got the stronger leg. I mean, this dude could hit from 69, 70 yards. I mean, like, he's just got that much. but he's not
Nice.
as accurate. Grupe's more consistent, and I think his placement on some of his accuracy is good. But there's something to be said about, Charlie Smyth, if he can develop the way he kicks a football, he can put the ball in some places that are just like kind of a little bit interesting because of what his background is. But, again, he's not under pressure to start or play or do anything because he's on that IPP contract and he's under contract for 3 years. He doesn't even count as a roster spot, right? He's a roster exemption. So I thought at first maybe we could have a legitimate competition, and I still think we can, but it seems like Charlie Smith's a little bit not as up to par as we thought maybe he would be. And that's not a knock on him because, he hasn't played the sport long, but, do you see him challenging more or do you just see Blake Grupe just being that much better?
Yeah, I don't know if either one of them is like that much better than the other. I think that so what I think that means is tie goes to the runner. I think that there's enough. I think there's enough that and like about Grupe, no doubt about it. And I think that there's shiny things too that you really like about Charlie Smyth, like the leg. And so I think that it puts them both kind of in a similar class in terms of what we've seen so far. And so I've got Blake Grupe still holding on to that spot as of right now. And I don't know if he's necessarily going to be tested if training camp looks like what mini camps and OTAs did. Because remember, we're also having to hedge for who's the holder when Lou Headley's the holder, what it looks like versus when Matthew Hayball's the holder and things like that. So there's stuff like that John and I have to factor into all this. But I think beyond that, or on top of that, however it is that you want to look at it, the other, it doesn't mean that Charlie Smyth can't create a competition. And so that's what I'll be looking for. I'm not going to walk in going, man, I can't wait to see the kicker competition, because as far as I believe, I'm going to walk in and not see a kicker competition, but I'm very open to the idea that Smyth can create a kicker competition. And then, so that's what I'm waiting for. I'm walking in going, I wonder if there's going to be a kicker competition, because there very well could be one. That's the way that I look at it.
Yeah, we knew last year there was a legitimate competition with Will Lutz and golly, Grupe. Well, not Grupe. I'm talking about punter Blake Gillikin.
Blake Gillikin.
Yeah. Think McFly. Hello. You know what I mean? And so again, we walked into that knowing that it was going to be. And again, we talked to Riz. We talked to all these coaches. It was a lot closer than what what may have seemed on the surface, and they went with Grupe. And look, I think you saw some of the struggles early on. Like, again, people said they should have won that Green Bay game because of his kick. That's part of it, but they also shouldn't have gave 17 points up in the final, 10, 12 minutes of the game too. I mean, to each their own, both can be true. But I think down the stretch, Grupe was solid for them. He was playing lights out. You know what I mean? Like, he was doing well. He didn't miss an extra point, obviously he's got a good leg. He's got a strong leg. It's just not as strong as Charlie Smyth. And so, I mean,
the other thing that's really interesting too. Yeah. The other thing that's really interesting too is how much does the new kickoff rule and kickoff style, in terms of the precision that you now need to have as a kickoff specialist, potentially impact that battle as well? Because the battle might not any longer be about just field goal kicking, and then can you kick it out of an end zone? It's also your consistency in kicking between the 0 or between the 20 and the goal line, and having your coverage unit weighted left and being able to put the ball where it needs to be in terms of placement to be able to maximize your coverage and all those other things. So I was just thinking about that too, is that that ends up probably having an impact on what that position looks like in 2024 as well.
Sure. And if I'm taking who's going to be tackling somebody on a kick team, I'll take Charlie Smyth, because he could actually do the job. I don't want Blake Grupe trying to tackle somebody. Just not a good
man. Listen, when we talked to Rizzy before minicamps wrapped up, I was so close to asking. And so here's a little bit behind the curtain in terms of how to ask questions at a press conference. I was so close to asking, have you ever considered, or is it standard at all for kickers to do tackling drills, especially with this new drill? But I didn't want to say that, and then there'd be some snide remark about Blake Grupe. I didn't want to do that to the poor dude. And then so I didn't ask the question, but I'm gonna have to just pull Riz off to the side and ask him away from the cameras because I don't want it to be like a thing. Everybody be like, "Oh, I can't believe Ross asked that question." No, and Blake Grupe, blah 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 and stuff. It's like that's not what it's about at all. But like I was real nervous, so I didn't ask that question.
Sure. Well, we'll get
But I'm
that.
curious. Like, do you give them those opportunities to like learn that a little bit? Like,
I mean, and in theory, it shouldn't come to that. But with this new return rule, we expect to see a lot more returns and a lot more scoring. So,
right.
I mean, that's a thing for sure.
Yep.
All right. So there's your offensive preview and kicker. I do want to get this question before we do get out of here. But and it's something that's pretty easy. You know, NFL looking at moving to 18 games. Do they go with a 56-man roster? The short answer is yes. Yes, they have to expand the roster. And I've been a proponent, a strong supporter of saying they just need to, have the game day roster. Like you shouldn't have all these inactives, right? Maybe 2 or 3 at most, but 46 people on a game day, like you need more. And then with 18, you need to go 2 bye weeks. Yeah, you got to up both legs.
Yeah, and you got to do 2 bye weeks. You got to up the 53-man active roster, and you got to up the game day roster because you don't want to up the game day roster to like 50, and then the team have like 4 people that need to be inactive, and the other team only have 3 people that need to be inactive. It creates like a competitive disadvantage in that case. So if you got to raise both is why we're saying like you got to raise both of them and everything like that. And then that way, and then at the same time, you don't want to raise your 53-man roster to a 56-man roster and then keep a 46-man game day roster because then you haven't done anything to help the team at all.
Exactly.
In those cases. So yeah. So I'm with you on that.
For sure.
And I think the second bye week, by the way, should be everybody gets the same bye week. So people should move around and then there would just be a week off. I like Joe Burrow's proposal to do that and then put the Pro Bowl there. Like where they do the All-Star game for baseball.
Like everybody. They do it for NBA. That's the All-Star
for
break.
sure.
NBA, NHL does it too. I mean, it's a legitimate thing.
Give an All-Star break.
For sure. I think so too. Like they used to play the Pro Bowl before the Super Bowl right after Super Bowl, I'm sorry, and stuff. So it was just one of those things too. This is one of the points we forgot to mention. Saratobi brings up a really good point about getting injured on that kickoff tackle. That is a fair point too, and you hopefully don't see that. But that is another thing. I would hate to see that happen to anybody, but could be just another one of those things. So, well, offensive preview for the Saints for training camp. Again, we're 1 week out. And we'll be there next Tuesday. We're going to be in for the long haul in California. The first practice is on Wednesday morning. A lot of more information is going to come. A lot of stuff that we're going to have in Second and Saints. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button. Turn on them notifications because we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes down to it. And a lot of fun, exciting things we told you last week on the pod and such. And we're going to be back on Thursday because we got to talk about the defense. And we're going to talk about punter as well, since Ross had kind of said, let's take the kicker and stuff. But, man, already in the books, Ross. And I know time constraints are upon us, but I always got to ask you, man, what's cooking at Locked On and what you got working on with the writing and stuff?
I am looking at all the camp battles going in. Most of them are like depth battles and things like that, but looking at all the camp battles, that'll be my next thing over at Saints News Network. And then tomorrow's episode, I go in depth on the why and why not for Brandon Ayuk, potential trade, and taking a look at what a Clint Kubiak wide zone offense is, just as a little bit of a primer for everybody. Like, what are the main tenets that you should expect? And then the one I'm really excited about too is that on Thursday I've got I was just talking about DVOA and stuff like that. Aaron Schatz actually came on the show and we broke down some of those numbers and everything as well. So I was really, really excited about that. So lots of good stuff. Just getting ready for training camp, man. That's what we're all about. What about you what about you, John?
Training camp mode, man. We're in the position preview. So I did quarterbacks today. Running backs will be out tomorrow. A lot of stuff that we talked about tonight. It's going to be kind of the same thing. And of course, we're looking at also, just odds and ends. I did that Taysom Hill piece not that long ago and looked at him pretty in depth. So if you haven't seen that on Saints News Network, go check that one out because it's if you want to know every touch about Taysom Hill, like how effective he was, what his first touch was. I mean, it was pretty nuts about it. And so work pretty hard on that and such. So check that out. And because you're going to learn information, gain knowledge off of that. But, again, it's training camp, all of it, training camp, full steam ahead on training camp. That's all we're talking about is training camp. Saints training camp, all of it. But that's going to do it for us. Another episode of Second and Saints that has been wrapped up. Again, join us again Thursday evening at 5 o'clock, same bat time, same bat channel. We will be back here to talk about the Saints defense in training camp. Y'all be good people. And on behalf of Ross Jackson, I'm John Hendricks signing out for Second and Saints.